Hello, hello, hello. You guys are still here. I love it. Thanks for hanging in with us this afternoon. We're glad you're staying for the rest of the afternoon. There is one more session after this, but between this session and the next, there will be a break. So please do come back for the very last session. Once again, if you have not downloaded the Global Summit app in your app store, please do so. In each session, there is an opportunity to give feedback, and we welcome you to give us feedback on what you liked, what you'd like to see improved on for next year. That's how we do a better event every year for our customers. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Nicholas from Veeam. Veeam is a very important customer of ours. Veeam is a global sponsor of the AWS Global Summit Series. We're thrilled to have them on stage with us today. And we're about to hear about cloud data management with Veeam and 2WS, that's a mouthful, and AWS. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Zarecki, and I'm a solution architect for Veeam Software. I've been with the company for 4 years, and I'm here to talk to you today about cloud data management with Veeam in AWS. Now, before I begin, I'm going to give you a little overview of Veeam. Veeam is a software company. We provide software for data management. When we first started out about 11 years ago, we started out as backup for the VMware environment. Since then, we've progressed as data protection for your private cloud. This would include VMware, Hyper-V, we've even extended to physical servers, etc. Now, we're all in on cloud data management, because that's where the customers are going, right? And we want to appease all of our customers. So Veeam in the numbers real quick. Right now, we protect over 18 million types of instances. That's a lot of instances. So I think we have our formula down pretty well to get to that 18 million number. We have over 330,000 customers worldwide. That's another hefty number. And furthermore, we have a net promoter score of 74, which is 3 times the industry average. All right, enough with the boring stuff. Let's get into some of the technical stuff. So, Veeam solution for AWS. What we do is we can break this down into 3 major parts. AWS solutions that we can protect. VMC on AWS, EC2 instances, yes, we can protect those. Furthermore, we were the first solution certified to protect VMC on AWS. Cloud mobility, the ability to take an instance that's on premises and move it seamlessly into the cloud. Or furthermore, taking your backup data that's taking up storage on premises and moving that data into the cloud with Veeam Cloud Tier. So let's start it up. Let's talk about protecting VMC on AWS. So VMC on AWS is VMware's offering within AWS's infrastructure. And if you remember a few slides ago, VMware is exactly where Veeam started out. So now we can provide our customers that maybe have Veeam on premises, well, we can give them that single pane of glass of protecting their on-premise VMware environment with their VMware environment hosted within AWS. Furthermore, we're going to give you all those great features that you might be used to within the on-premise software, which would be application item recovery, file level recovery, actually whole instance recovery. Furthermore, if you want to recover an instance that's hosted on VMC on AWS into an EC2 instance, well, Veeam's going to give you that flexibility to do so. So, some features in depth. We could back up and restore instances on VMC AWS. We can do file level recovery for Windows and Linux instances. We have explorers to recover application items. So let's say, usually this would be done by an intern, and I was that intern. An intern goes in and thinks they know stuff about GPO policy and edits GPO, and guess what? GPO is messed up across the enterprise. Well, what do you need to do? Do you need to restore your Active Directory servers? No. You just probably would need to restore that GPO item to get everything working properly. Well, Veeam gives you that granularity through an easy-to-use Explorer to facilitate such a request. Backup copy job. None of us really like to keep all our eggs in one basket. So we'll give you the ability to not only keep your data on premises, but to copy it somewhere else, be it the cloud, be it to another data center, whatever it may be. Also, we support the AWS VTL Gateway. And this is very, very important to know because some enterprises, especially in government, have a longer retention because of compliance. Well, that AWS VTL Gateway will give you the ability to store your long-term retention in what's called Amazon's Glacier Deep Archive. So that's another important tidbit. And of course, everything we do, it's encrypted, in flight, and at rest. So, the infrastructure to protecting VMware and VMC on AWS, it's quite simple. All we need is a virtual machine, a Windows OS. We install our software on it. We will connect to your vCenter. Now, where you store that backup data is going to be completely up to you. Veeam gives you that flexibility so you can store that data wherever you want to store it. Do you want to store it within your cluster? You could within VMC, no problem. Do you want to store it in maybe a Linux instance initially so you can get that fast recovery, then offload it into S3? Guess what? Yes, you could do that. It's flexible architecture to provide the type of protection that you would need on your VMware and AWS deployment. Furthermore, we can also replicate, right? Let's face it, a secondary data center to have just for replication, I don't know if that's the most cost-effective thing, but it could be, or maybe not. Maybe VMC on AWS might be the more cost-effective solution. And let me tell you, utilizing Veeam's replication natively, we can replicate those workloads into VMC and AWS. Furthermore, in the event that you would need to fail over, you can just initiate your failover plan, which will be a click of the button. Then all your instances will power on within VMC on AWS, and it'll be business continuity. Now, we can replicate out of VMC, right? But honestly, the resiliency that VMC on AWS provides is pretty darn good. So, Veeam has other technologies besides replication. We have the ability to isolate your backup, boot it up, and scan that backup for viruses, giving you a secure way to restore your data back into your production environment. Because let's face it, if you have a malware attack, the last thing you want to do is restore an instance that has malware on there. So Veeam gives you that ability to scan that data. Furthermore, if there's any compliancy reasons that you need to test your backups, right? Again, it's just a requirement that you may have for a particular certification. Veeam has data labs, which will actually spin up again your instances within an isolated vSwitch, isolated environment, will actually power up your backup, will actually run scripts against the application, against the OS. We'll see if we can get a heartbeat. And then we're going to email you a report. This isn't just a simple checksum of your backup data. This is actually us doing the work for you in an automated fashion of booting this backup on, actually running scripts to make sure everything's copacetic. So there's a lot of flexibility that Veeam provides with both on-premise and VMC on AWS. Now, a real quick question. How many people here are familiar with Veeam? How many people have heard of Veeam? How many people have Veeam? Very good. All right. So we discussed about VMC on AWS, but what about EC2 instances? How many people here run EC2 instances within AWS? Okay. Well, in the event that you do run instances in AWS EC2, and you do have maybe VMC on AWS, or maybe you have VMware on premises, guess what? we can utilize our agents to protect those EC2 instances. And again, it's going to provide you that single pane of glass among those three platforms that I just discussed. So our Windows agent has a lot of great features. That application-aware processing that I was speaking of, that's included. Furthermore, we have something called a CBT driver within our Windows agent. What a CBT driver is called change block tracking. And where this is significant, it's when, all right, great, I did my first full backup. Now my next backup needs to happen, and it's going to be an incremental backup. Well, what Veeam can do is go look at that CBT record and know what blocks have changed instantly, instead of having to rescan your file system or your OS or your data disk to locate those changes, making it a very quick and efficient incremental backup, taking the lowest amount of resources as possible. And again, too, I really want to point out our application level recovery, our granularity. Again, in a lot of scenarios, you're not going to need to restore the whole instance. You're going to need to restore a file that was deleted, maybe restore an application item. Maybe you want to bring up a SQL database from the last backup. Maybe you just need to restore a table into your SQL database. Veeam is going to give you that granularity. And again, we're going to do so by wizards. Yes, you're not going to have to read through a 40-page manual to do a SQL restore. It's a beautiful thing. And yes, we also have Linux agents. Linux agents provide that same type of protection. We do have a CBT driver for Linux. Furthermore, you can do pre-freeze post-thaw scripts, so you can better protect your application running within that Linux instance. So, we talked about backing up data, right? We talked about backing up on-premises a little bit, VMC on AWS, EC2 instances. How about storing that data? So, there's a few challenges going on right now. Two main challenges, really. Data growth. Does anyone here have less data within their organization than when they started the company? Has anyone's data increased over the years? No, it's growing. Most likely it's going to grow at a rapid rate. Therefore, what that means is your backup data is going to grow, right? And traditionally, that's going to mean more on-premise storage or more block-level storage, right? And here's the other problem that we're running into, compliance requirements. A lot of people are under guidelines to store their data for a year, for 5 years, for 7 years I'm running into a lot. And that combined with data growth is going to be a swell worth of storage, right? It's just going to keep consuming more and keep consuming more. So now what does the market say? Well, customers are getting sick of hardware, right? They want to reduce the hardware costs. Furthermore, they want this backup solution to be stored in the cloud. They don't want to deal with tapes no more. They don't want to deal with on-premise solution. They want to use this great durable object storage that's being offered up by the public cloud. So what can we do now? How can we start? Well, Veeam has something called CloudTier. And what CloudTier does is give customers a way to offload their backup data from block storage into a more cost-effective and possibly even more durable object storage. You're going to be able to define the data you want to tier into this object storage. Now, let me tell you why it's important to tier data. So Veeam has something called Instant VM Recovery, right? And then you might have within your organization an operational restore window that I notice I'm restoring backups within a 7-day period of time. So anything within 7 days, I want it on block storage. So I get that blazing fast restore, right? But then after 7 days, I'm noticing I'm not really touching that data too much. So I don't really need that blazing fast restore speed after data 7 days old. Well, Veeam is going to give you the ability to tier that data into object storage based on your requirements, based on your operational restore window, meaning your long-term data that's not touched could sit in S3 or Amazon S3 in frequent access. So, what does Cloud Tier work like? Well, Cloud Tier is actually a feature within our scale-out backup repository. Okay? And a scale-out backup repository is a way for the customer to piecemeal, basically, direct-attached storage, maybe network-attached storage, maybe a CIFS, into one logical repository. That way, all your backup jobs are going to one SOBR instead of all these different repositories. Okay? Well, with our latest update, we introduced this Cloud Tier. So now, along with direct attached storage, network attached storage, maybe some type of file share, well, now we can add object storage to that mix. So, how does this object storage work? Why is it so efficient? To understand that, we need to understand a little bit of the Veeam backup file. Veeam backup file is basically a shell. Okay? Within the shell, it contains two things: metadata and data blocks. Okay? So, once we're ready to tier data into Cloud Tier, what happens is we're going to copy the metadata into S3. Then we're going to move the data blocks into S3. I didn't know I have to click this one by one. So, as these are moved, what's left is a dehydrated backup file, which is basically just metadata that's left on premises. And the copy, again, of both metadata and data blocks are up in the cloud. So, oh, sorry. So what happens is now we have a cache of what's left into the Cloud Tier. So we don't need to scan Cloud Tier when we need to facilitate a restore. We can just simply look on premises, look at the metadata, and be like, oh, okay, these blocks are in object storage. I need to grab blocks X, Y, and Z back to facilitate your restore. So what's the biggest difference is our shell that we leave behind, right? Again, if we need to facilitate a restore, we have something called intelligent block management that we're going to see through that metadata if there's light spikes on premises or if we have to go into object storage. What does this do? This greatly reduces your data access costs, API costs, and egress costs associated when you need to facilitate a restore. Let's just pull these up. The other thing we don't do is we do not double charge. Our Cloud Tier is absolutely included in our product. Let me put it to you this way. It's in our community edition of our product, okay? So the community editions are a free edition. I do urge you, if you haven't used Veeam and we're meeting some of your requirements, to try it out. But it's available there. So the only cost you're going to pay utilizing our Cloud Tier is the actual cost from your cloud provider, being AWS. No vendor lock-in. You know how I stated our free edition could use Cloud Tier? Well, let's say you're a Veeam customer, and let's say you no longer use Veeam. Well, guess what? If you ever need to restore old backup data that was within your Cloud Tier, within AWS S3, you don't need to contact us. You don't need to be have a restore license or anything like that. Again, you can download the community edition to facilitate your restores, okay? Another thing, complete flexibility of your data. You can move your data from on-premises to the cloud, vice versa, with no issues. And again, we're never going to tax you for that. So, let me show you a little bit of what Cloud Tier looks like. So I'm going to pull up this video, and let me see. Very good. Great. So here, right here, you see the Veeam Backup and Replication Console. Within the Veeam Backup Replication Console, we have a backup. And if we look at this backup, we're going to notice that everything says scale out backup repository. That means this data is within block storage. Okay? Today's backup, yesterday's backup, everything is in the object storage. So, again, we don't want all that data sitting in object storage. Look, if we look, we have 60 gigs of data sitting there. And I know this doesn't seem a lot, but again, this is just an example. Imagine this to be 60 terabytes or something more viable, right? So we don't have a need to keep all that data on-premise. Again, we can alleviate some of those backups into the cloud. So what we're going to do is we are going to add object storage to our scale-out backup repository. And as you can see, we have a whole bunch of choices of object storage that we can add, but the most important ones are the AWS S3 right now. So once I select AWS S3, I'm simply going to give it a name, can give it a description. I talk faster than I can type. Pick the cloud credentials to access the S3 bucket. Furthermore, you could pick what type of data center, global, China, you have all those options. And furthermore, you can utilize a gateway. So let's say you have a direct connect and want to pipe that information or that backup data over your direct connect. Well, you can utilize a gateway sitting on the other side within your VPC to facilitate such a request. So I have my bucket. I'm going to create a folder for my bucket, and I can do that easily through the Veeam console. I'm going to click Next. Now, I'm going to be able to set a quota up for my capacity tier. Right? So let's say you don't want to just run rampant on total data going into cloud tier. Well, I can limit it to X amount of value. So 10 terabytes, 50 terabytes, 100 terabytes, whatever the case may be. So now, when I go into my S3 bucket, I see my folders there that Veeam already created, but there's no data inside of it yet. So now, what I'm going to need to do is actually add my capacity tier into my scale-out backup repository. As you can see, I have my 3 extents there. I'm simply going to go into my properties. Sooner or later, I'm going to get to the point that says capacity. Performance, data locality. Basically, we can designate how we store your data on premises. Here we go. This is what I want to see. I want to enable my capacity tier. So I'm going to select my bucket. And then I'm going to set a window. So anything that's older than a day old, I want to get sent into the capacity tier. Anything that's older than a week old, 14 days, again, this is a number you can set. Furthermore, as you just seen, we can also do an overwrite policy. So if my storage is at 80, 90% utilization, whatever you deem necessary, I can start offloading data into that capacity tier. Great. I'm going to click Finish. And now, what we're going to do is offload this data into capacity tier. Now, our offload jobs run every 4 hours, okay? So, 4 hours later, my offload job is going to kick off. Again, I talk faster than I record, obviously. So my offload job is going to kick off. And what my offload job does is look into my scale-out backup repository. It looks for data that it could send out into the cloud tier, right? Data older than 1 day old. And then it's going to trickle the data up into S3 or S3 infrequent access. There you go. It's going to get started shortly here. Yeah, we fast-forwarded that a little bit, so there's a little bit of a smoking mirror, but not too much. We didn't go that fast. Great. So now my data is up into cloud tier as per the policy that I set. Now, when I look, I see that some of my backups, my oldest backups, are in my object storage. They're not in my scale-out backup repository. Furthermore, when I go into my Windows Explorer, I'm going to notice it's no longer 60 gigs that I have stored within there. Now I only use 30 gigs of my on-premise storage. Any questions? Yes, sir. Absolutely, you have complete freedom. So what you can do is you can have a backup stay on premises and not utilize the cloud tier, and then you can have another backup that's going to a scale-out backup repository that does utilize cloud tier. So you do have complete flexibility. And furthermore, if you have a big backup, don't forget, we take your backup file and remove that shell, so it's no longer a big unmanageable file. There are blocks and metadata now that we transpose. So it makes pushing the big data more efficient because, let's face it, if we're going to push a big VBK file at 5 terabytes and there's a blip, well, there's a chance that we might have lost all that time doing that upload. That's a great question. So now, talked about backing up data. We talked about how we can store that backup data. Now let's talk a little bit about cloud mobility. So, what's the big deal about cloud mobility? Well, people want to migrate data into the cloud, right? I mean, it's happening. And furthermore, a lot of organizations don't have the time to decouple their applications and use the microservices, right? So a lot of times, the easiest way to get your data into the cloud would just be a simple instance migration. So then, once we migrate the data up into the cloud, how do we protect it, right? And that's another issue with cloud mobility. How do we protect that? And then, how do we test and develop? Well, if you remember from earlier, we have all those features built into our product. So what cloud mobility with Veeam, or what the market says is, people want to move more and more to the cloud, right? I mean, how many people here want to move more of their data into the cloud or thinking about it? I mean, we're at an AWS summit, right? So, Veeam Cloud Mobility. Veeam Cloud Mobility is going to consist of direct restore to Amazon EC2. And what that's going to do is give us the ability to take any Veeam backup. Doesn't matter if I grabbed it from Hyper-V. It doesn't matter if it's a UEFI bootloader on a physical server. It doesn't matter. I can take any backup from Veeam and restore that backup into AWS as an EC2 instance. Furthermore, once I restore that instance as EC2, well, guess what? We have the ability to protect that instance as well. And furthermore, if you want to restore that instance somewhere else, we're going to give you that mobility as well. So it's complete freedom of your data, complete mobility. And again, anything backed up by Veeam Backup and Replication, our agents, anything can be restored as an EC2 instance. There's a little secret sauce we have. We actually have a converter within our direct restore to EC2. We have this converter to change the bootloader from UEFI to BIOS. So that's what makes this tool so great and so flexible. And again, don't forget, once it's restored, you can protect it with Veeam and have complete flexibility if you want to restore it within your VMC on AWS or anywhere else that you want. We went over that. So, case studies. Please visit this URL. Please look at our case studies. Please look at our customer success stories. As you can see, we have a lot of people using our product right now. You might have a use case that totally correlates with what we have published. Don't hesitate. Please check that out. Furthermore, please don't hesitate to go to veeam.com/AWS for a full comprehensive detail on how not only we can protect AWS workloads, but how we can leverage AWS as well for storing your backup data. I really thank you for sitting through this presentation. I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Stop by that Veeam booth. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have. And please complete the survey when you're done with the session or when you're done with the day, so we can make this AWS Summit a better summit in the years to come. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.